Hello and welcome to the Lockdown Beers and Rugby Chat. It's nearly 5 o'clock, just 1 minute and 37 seconds to go until 5 o'clock, and we can crack open the beer and start winding down for the evening. So yes, start logging out of those work emails and other work kind of applications and start thinking about what you're going to do this evening. Well, we can help you with the first bit. As I say, we'll go through the rugby news from the last 24 hours. We've got another couple of signings for Moana Pasifika, doing a great job of releasing an announcement every single day, which is keeping the fans engaged. I think it's a really great way of doing things. The Blues have also announced an interesting signing as well for in their loosies. We've got World Rugby's response to the World 12's proposal as well. And as you can probably tell by the title of this show, it's a big fat no, unsurprisingly. And we'll just remind people as to the international rugby that's happening this weekend and what those kickoff times are here in New Zealand. It's going to be one for the Night Owls, I can tell you, because, yes, it's all early hours of the morning for your international rugby this coming weekend, unfortunately. Just 25 seconds until 5 o'clock, then we can crack open the old beer. My main focus today, I'll be honest with you, has been around the Kia Play and the stables that I'm selling on, on Trade Me. 10 seconds. So do check that out. Search for Wooden Stables Kia for Like Horses, I think it's called, on there. And it is 5 o'clock, so cracking open that beer. What a wonderful sound that is for you people listening on the podcast. Because remember, folks, if you can't be here at 5 o'clock, what you can do is you can subscribe to New Zealand Sport Radio on your favorite podcatcher, be that Spotify or Apple Podcasts or all those sort of places. And you can listen to us. It'll download onto your phone every single day. Also, obviously, we are live on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter, and you can join in the live chat on Facebook and YouTube. Unfortunately, Twitter has removed that functionality, but do let us know if and where you are joining us from. Good evening, Stephen, and a few birds in the background there in the countryside.
Yeah, no, a little bit, shall we say? Bit of a wet day, I've got to say. The 09 is not great this afternoon.
No, it's not. Look, folks, in the 09 and in the rest of the country, because obviously we've had those couple of cases in down in the South Island as well. And I've not been following what's been going on down there, to be honest with you, folks. But look, please do follow the rules and get yourselves vaccinated as quickly as possible so that we can get back to as close to normality as possible as well. So then, kicking off then, the news has come out that World Rugby has reviewed the World 12's concept, and as they've said, after full consideration, basically they've decided that it's not something that they want to progress with at this moment in time. No big surprise, really, folks. Let's be honest. Trying to fit in another tournament into what is already a crowded schedule for the international top players was really always going to be a big ask. Let's be honest. World 12s did announce their first or their CEO today on the same day that they got pushed back from World Rugby. So we'll see if what happens. I mean, they're talking a big game about the fact that they'll continue. It's a multi-year project for the World 12s. But look, it always seemed like very much a long shot, didn't it, Stephen?
Yeah, very much so. Just the idea's right, but maybe the timing's all wrong. Paul, we're just about to go into a whole lot of autumn internationals, and the game has seen a couple of changes in and around the rules. So maybe the timing is maybe not just quite right. Maybe the game's just got a few other issues to address before we actually start looking at another competition. And of course, COVID has put a lot of those competitions in a little bit of jeopardy across the world. So I think there's just probably a little bit more to worry about at this stage.
Oh, I'll go harder than that. I think it's a bad idea. At the moment, we've got the top international players being asked to play too much rugby already, or at least the maximum that they can do, really. If you think the All Blacks are playing 15 Test matches this year, they're also, if you add that onto they normally play 14 add that onto a Super Rugby campaign for about 18 games. That's what gives you 32 games a year out of 52 weekends. Give yourself 5 weeks off. That 32 becomes 37. And folks, if you don't have a preseason, you're going to break players. And so, look, there isn't room really for any more games. And if you think there's obviously the odd week gap here and there between competitions, and suddenly, basically, your entire year's gone. So, yeah, look, it's a non-starter for me. Trying to include a competition that has the top players in it. If you talk about a competition that has non-internationals involved, absolutely, there's room for that. But internationals currently are at their maximum, folks. So no, it's a big no from me.
Paul, I was going to say Paul, we're also seeing an example of the power of clubs with this Australian team that's heading away on their autumn tour already. We've had 2 or 3 players, I think it is, already pull out because obviously Japanese rugby clubs pull the purse strings, and at the end of the day, if that's how it plays out, then so be it.
Yeah, look, there's a big outcry about this because it's Australia. It's happening to. This happens to Wales every single time for all their games outside of the window. Now, obviously, this is impacting games inside the window as well for Australia. But you know what? It impacts the tier 2 nations inside the window every single year. But we don't get a big hoo-ha about it. We've got a big hoo-ha this time because it's Australia. Okay. Whereas, and yes, we have little mini hoo-has around it about on the Pacific Island teams, but generally the players try to keep quiet because they speak out. They know they basically lose their jobs, and so we're less aware of it with the tier 2 Pacifica players, unfortunately. But yes, welcome to the real world, Australia. The only reason this doesn't happen to the All Blacks is because they refuse to select players from overseas. South Africa have judiciously dropped or not selected players from various zones for various competitions in the past as well. The big difference between this one with Wallabies is that it's basically been done at the last minute, and they haven't communicated well. Wow, what's that? A central rugby union not communicating well, and stuff happening at the last minute. What a big surprise! But if they'd communicated properly, they'd have known about this, and it would all have been sorted. But clearly, and there's a lot of conflicting information coming out. Some people are saying it's a clubs issue. Some people are saying, oh, actually, the clubs have said yes, but the players have said no. We're not in those discussions. We don't know. We'll see. Josh thinks this issue will gain traction since it affects Australia. And we'll see, because again, as we've seen with a lot of these things, when we're not in the room, a bit like the discussion that was had between Australia and New Zealand around Super Rugby Pasifika and announcements around travelling to play various games. We've seen accusation and counter-accusation in the media. Who knows what really happened? We don't. So we'll see. Maybe this is Australia's fault. Maybe it's the club's fault. Maybe it's the players' fault. It's probably a combination of all three, to be honest with you. I don't think we'll see it will gain that much traction because it's only affecting Australia, right? The Six Nations teams are all like, yeah, whatever. So they're not going to vote for a change that impacts the clubs that they have relationships with. It doesn't impact New Zealand. So yeah, Australia will be if they try to push through a regulation, they'll basically be trying to push it through on their own. I can't see there being any traction for that personally on that side of things. Any final words, or should we move on to a bit more positive news?
No, I think we can move on. Listen, I think Australia should just use it as a positive. And, it's about building your depth as well. And I think that's the positive light that they've got to look at, whether they decide to go back to somebody like Lolosio and select the young men and just give them another opportunity. And listen, Karevi originally, I think at the beginning of the year, I don't know if Karevi was originally on their radar, but obviously he got himself fit through sevens, and a window came back and an opportunity opened up. So we've always known he was a good rugby player. But on saying that, I think it's just good that it's given an opportunity for somebody like Izzy Parisi. I'm a little bit biased because I rate him to get an opportunity maybe in that team, but also Hunter Paisami, who didn't see in those latter tests of the year as well.
Yep, no, absolutely. They definitely they've got options in the centres. It's just just the options at first five will be stretched, especially if they get an injury. So it's going to be. We'll see how that all goes. Moana Pasifika then. At last, we have got some front row boys being talked about. We've got a couple of props have been announced. So up until this point, Sokopi Kepu was the only front row player that we'd had announced from Moana Pasifika, and we have, as I say, two new ones. We've got Issa Twangafasi, Offa's brother, I think it is. Steve.
Yes. Yep. That's correct.
Now, I'll be honest, he wasn't someone that Stephen and I thought was going to be in this squad because we thought he was still contracted with the Crusaders. But
on saying that, Paul, we would have selected him had he been available.
Absolutely. We would have selected him if we thought he was available. Absolutely. Now, clearly he is available and he has been selected, but we thought he wouldn't be. So, yes. So good signing there. Obviously playing for Tasman in the MPC, and with him as part of the Tasman group, part of Tasman, obviously in the Crusaders area. I'd say we really thought he was kind of locked in there, but clearly he's got this option, which is fantastic for him, and he'll get more game time up at Moana Pasifika, let's be honest. And he'll be joined by someone that he knows from the New Zealand under-20s. Now, I'm going to butcher this, and Stephen will correct me afterwards, but Tau Kola Manatangi is my attempt.
Yeah, no, listen, not a bad effort, Paul. That's Tau Kola Matangi. Now, Tau originally came through the Waikato system, and that's where he pretty much made the New Zealand 20s, but he never quite cracked a position in the Waikato team. So he actually moved north up to Northland and played a bit of club rugby for the Western Sharks for about 3 seasons or so. Now, Tau's problem has always been just obviously carrying an extra bit of weight. He would have always been listed at about 140 kg. Seems to be a wee bit of a problem with it for a few of our Polynesian props, and I don't mean that in a disrespectful way. It's just one of those things. But it just seems, watching some of the rugby that he's been playing for Otago this year, obviously holding a first string place on. I'm just trying to think if he's on the tight head or loose head. I think been playing on the tight head side of the scrum. And listen, he's shown that he's a lot fitter. Just seems to have shed a wee bit of weight and doing a bit of work around the paddock. So hey, listen, fantastic selection. But I've got to say, he's probably one we had on our radar. But fitness was always a wee bit of a concern for some of these Pacific Island props.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm just trying to see which jersey he was in, the 18 jersey. So that means that would be the the tight head side.
Tight head side,
wouldn't it?
Yep.
So yeah, for Tour. Joshua said, looks pretty fit for Otago so far. Yep, and let's hope he stays off the KFC in the off season. Because let's be honest, that is one of the downfalls of a lot of the players. I remember watching one of the documentaries about the Pacific teams for the Rugby World Cup in France, where they would basically they said they sneaked out at night to try and find fried chicken. So clearly it's an Achilles heel, as you say, of the players. Look, hey, it's nice food. So. So 2 good signings there. Happy to see those guys joining Sokopi Kepu. And look, I expect to hear a few more props and hookers over the next few days as well. We still don't have a single hooker in the squad. So we'll just say I expect to see a couple of those along the way. Look, and just because we haven't heard of them doesn't mean they aren't already signed, folks. Now, you'll find that most of these players were signed probably about a month ago. At least, but for media reasons and for creating as much of a buzz and trying to stay in the limelight and stay in people's consciousness, that's why they're announcing these players over about a 3 or 4 week period. It's just try and stay in, stay in the limelight and get as much exposure as possible. So well done to them. Unlike the Fiji and Drua, who've tried to do it by doing batches of sort of 5 or 6 players, and now if you look on their social media, they're putting out photos of those players training. It doesn't gain the same traction or the same exposure as announcing a player. And so hence, I think Moana Pasifika have done it better this time.
And Paul, there's nothing better than speculation as well. When you put a bit of speculation out there, you create a little bit of conversation. And and I think in a lot of cases we've been pleasantly surprised thus far with the strength of the squad, given how late they got their license in the piece, given that they've probably had to formulate their way through a wee bit of a minefield when it comes to players that are already contracted, or the New Zealand Rugby Union doesn't want them to go after. I think thus far they've done really, really well. There seems to be a little bit building about maybe there could be a surprise player on the scene. So that's something to be excited about.
Absolutely. Look, we've got some. I think there's a space for one more, according to my calculations, qualifying player in the squad. Look, I mean, there's been kind of rumours that obviously Arnie Surveyor is out of contract to the Crusaders, the Hurricanes, for example, and New Zealand Rugby said that was it 2 or 3 All Blacks would be allowed to play, or up to 2 or 3 All Blacks would be allowed to play for Moana Pasifika. So look, there is a possibility of somebody like that turning up, and that would be a fantastic piece of getting bums on seats.
Paul, that would be one of the big stories of New Zealand rugby, to have an All Black defect to a non-New Zealand. Well, it's not a non-New Zealand franchise, but a franchise outside. I mean, to say Arnie Savia moving to any one of the other 4 franchises would be a huge story, but moving to Moana Pasifika, that would be just next level.
And look, it's a sort of thing that if New Zealand Rugby have got their media hat on now, we quite often bemoan that they don't give Super Rugby enough exposure and that they don't market it very well. But this would be a kind of marketing move that would be that they should be thinking of doing to create a big buzz in this. A bit like they mentioned that in the future they might think of allowing All Blacks to go play in Australia. And you're like, well, oh, come on. It's a no-brainer, right, to allow that to happen. As long as the players stay within the competition, and as long as there's a contract saying that they are treated the same way as they are in New Zealand, then there are no problems with it. So these are sort of things that from an exposure, a marketing point of view, New Zealand Rugby just need to think about.
Paul, I would bet dollars to donuts if you did a wee bit of a survey out there and you put it out there within Hawke's Bay Rugby. Who are you supporting in Super Rugby, Hawke's Bay or Moana Pasifika? I'll tell you what, I think you might find it might be 70-30 towards Moana Pasifika. That's kind of what I'm hearing out of Hawke's Bay at the minute.
You mean versus Hurricanes, but yes. Jamie Wall said that the game between the Hurricanes and Moana Pasifika should be taken to Nelson. And he wasn't joking on that one. Look, he puts a whole bunch of stuff out there on Twitter that is a bit joking, is a bit deliberately controversial, but that actually is a very good idea when you look at the players that Moana Pasifika have signed. Taking that game between Moana Pasifika and the Hurricanes to Nelson, would be a fantastic move. I mean, look, the Hurricanes do take games there on a fairly regular basis. So this would be a very good one for them to choose to take there. Josh Scott says Wales are their first choice type 5. Yep. Look, there's been a lot of talk about Wales and the players they haven't got available to them, but look, they're used to not having players available either through injury, generally through injury. So look, this is going to be a cracking. This is going to be a proper test match on the weekend, folks. Just a little reminder as to the international action this weekend. On Sunday morning at 2:30 a.m., we have Scotland versus Tonga. That is followed at 5:15 a.m. by Wales versus New Zealand. Wales versus the All Blacks. And then on Monday morning at 3:30, we have a women's international between England versus New Zealand. So the Roses versus the Black Ferns on Monday morning as well. So 3 test matches this weekend, folks. In that one, there was a really interesting article done by I've gone blank as to them, but it's a women's rugby Twitter account and blog, talking about how many games have how many games have the Black Ferns played. Now, a lot of you will have heard that it's 100 test matches or 100 games up till this weekend. But the interesting thing is that's 100 games that New Zealand Rugby have managed women's rugby. Now, before that, New Zealand Rugby, there was a separate organisation in New Zealand that ran women's rugby to men's rugby before they merged into each other. And there are a number of games played at that point. So it's interesting that some of those games there are some games that do get included, some games that don't get included. There's about 4 different ways you can count how many games the Black Ferns have played. It's a bit of it was all a bit of the Wild West back in the 80s and 90s for women's rugby. Hey,
shall we call that? Was that the Rebel League, Paul, to get women's rugby off the ground?
No, this one. It was them doing their own thing, which when you look at how some of the unions have treated them compared to the men, you've got to say you're better off on your own than you are with the men's unions, to be blunt. But maybe in some cases. So I'd say Scrum Queens is the name of the account. I can't find the actual because I wasn't expecting to talk about this. I can't actually find the article at the moment. But go check out Scrum Queens on Twitter, and you'll be able to find that article, which I thought was really interesting. That things like, so for example, the New Zealand Rugby recognised a game between the Black Ferns and a World 15. Now, normally you wouldn't call games against a World 15 or a Barbarians team as a test match, but they have counted them. But they haven't counted a game between the Black Ferns and France, for example, which French historians would do. So it's all a bit interesting as to how that all how it's all counted for those nerds amongst you. And I'm one of those folks. That's why I find it interesting. Finally, the Blues have announced a foreign player. It's rare we get foreign players in Super Rugby. Well, not totally rare, but we don't see many German players, do we, Stephen?
Not really. Not many German players, or not many Crusaders players transferring to the Blues. Although we've got a coach who, in recent times, has made that transition.
Yeah. So Anton Segner is the player we're talking about, who came over and has basically been playing schoolboy rugby over here. Has come through the New Zealand system. Is currently playing for Tasman, and again, a player within the sort of Tasman Canterbury you would normally expect would be closely aligned with the Crusaders. But interesting to see that has that he has actually left and moved up north.
Yeah, very interesting, Paul. It's sort of got me. I'm thinking a couple of ways at the minute. Just wondering if there's a little bit of horse trading. There was an Instagram going around that the Blues are looking at just 2 more loosies to pretty much make up their loose forward roster. And based on what we saw last year, we saw Tane Plumtree in that squad. So I'm just wondering if there's a bit of horse trading going on between the Blues and the Crusaders, and we might see somebody like Tane Plumtree, given that they've lost Fitu Kamakamo Douglas, who's headed away overseas. I'm starting to just fill in these little gaps at the minute, Paul. We haven't seen a lot of Callum Grace, and we also know that a player. Yeah, there we go, right there. Those little bubbles or whatever they almost look like, what do you call herbs or whatever you call them.
Orbs.
That are, yeah.
So according to the Blues, Twitter, it's on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. They say collecting all the loose forward Dragon Balls. Be honest with you, I'm not young and trendy enough to understand what they mean by Dragon Balls, but there you go.
Yeah.
But if you look at the faces that we have there, obviously Akira Ioane and Dalton Papali'i at the front. We got Hoskins Tutu in at the middle there. On as I'm looking at it, the left-hand side, you got Tom Robinson and Anton is the face at the back there, giving you the 5 players. And obviously there are 2 there that are blank, hence, suggesting that there are 2 more signings to be announced. Now, from if we look at the squad from last year, as you say, Tane Plumtree was in the squad, as was Dylan Hunt, but he was injured, didn't play, and had an injury replacement of Adrian Choate. So, those 3 players, you've got to say, are one of those 3 players going to get, or 2 of those 3 players going to be in those holes, or have we got other players coming through?
Yeah,
I mean, there's such names as Nico Jones, for example, as Josh in the live chat asks, what happened to Michael Jones's son? Is a name that currently isn't linked to any Super Rugby franchises, but our intel suggests that he may be heading overseas on that one. So we'll have to wait and see about that. But there's a number of names that could fit in, or a number of faces that could fit into those balls there.
Oh, very much so, Paul. If you kind of look at the makeup, I could almost see why Tane Plumtree isn't in that squad, because in terms of specialist sixes, you've probably got at least 4 players there who could play on that in that number 6 jersey. Signer could jump into a 6 jersey at the drop of a hat required, and you would imagine Tom Robinson, being the captain of the Blues, will probably spend a bit of time in that 6 jersey. So to me, you're still looking for another specialist 7. Adrian Choate, who was pretty much, I think he was a spare bit player in the squad last year, maybe more injury cover than anything else. Do you look at somebody like Adrian Choate, or I'm not too sure the full fitness of Dylan Hunt, who I'm hearing stories may actually have to retire because of head injuries? Now, with 2 more spots, is one of your 7s coming from one of those players, or like you say, a Nico Jones? Or are they looking at somebody like a couple of young guns like Kitiona Vai, New Zealand Sevens player, or Vaioloni Uakasi, the number 8, who we saw in probably little, what do you call them, single bites in the Auckland's first 2 games of the year, and he did look pretty useful. He is another number 8, which will probably give them 3 number 8s if you take Hoskins Tutu and Akira Ioane, who can play at the drop of a hat. Or are these 2 players the sort of players that are actually looking at more of a wider training group contract?
Well, look, I mean, Hoskins Tutu clearly is an 8. Akira is we'll find out in the next day whether he is the incumbent 6 for the All Blacks or not. But essentially, they see him as a 6 for him. So you've got Tom Robinson and Akira Ioane are your 6s. Hoskins an 8. Dalton Papali'i is obviously a 7. So you say an 8 and a 7 in those 2 other Dragon Balls, I wouldn't be surprised at. So as you say, those names that you came up there with that most people won't have heard of, from the Sevens program, who is an 8 would fit in well. We'll see how those players get.
This is how I think it'll play out. I think they'll name Dylan Hunt. I think Adrian Choate will get named as early season All Black cover, and I think they'll also pick Ikoasi as a fully contracted player. Kitiona Vai, who is a very, very good player, sort of in the Ari Savia mould. I think will probably get a wider training contract simply because he's also involved in the Sevens program as well. That's how I think it will play out.
And look, we've got a lot of we've got to wait and see, a lot of wait and see as to around what happens with a lot of these Sevens players. Will the HSBC World Tour mean that they're needed, or will New Zealand Rugby pull out of the stops as they have done so far, and therefore they need to have a go somewhere else? And Joshua Scott still thinks that Akira Ioane should be playing at 13, which is an interesting call. Definitely not a kicking 13, but yes.
Paul, I'm hearing through the grapevine that we might see Gideon Rampling at the Blues this year.
Okay.
Yeah. So that'll be really interesting. Listen, if he gets picked up at the Blues, that is a huge pickup.
The just trying to think where. Well,
if you think of the Chiefs midfielders, they've got Tapia at the moment. They've got Anton Leonard-Brown. You've got Nankiville. So there's some quality there. Although they will be looking for another centre, obviously with the unfortunate passing of Sean Wainui. So some interesting things happening in the Chiefs at the minute as well.
It's very much so, and you've in that one because Balin Sullivan has moved over to the Hurricanes, which does create a spot in that centre positioning. In that one, is Coombs Fabling signed to anyone? Asked Joshua. I don't think so.
Yeah, somebody sign him. He's a good footballer.
Yeah, isn't he? I think he's the leading try scorer in the NPC this year.
Listen, I think he's one of those players, and we should never think because you're a small winger. I mean, probably the best winger in the world is not that tall, and Coombs Fabling has just been in sensational form. Not just on attack, but he shows you up in defence as well, and he is rapid.
I've got a Damien McKenzie's been released. Is he on a sabbatical next year?
Yes.
Oh, he is, yes. So DMAC, obviously they've also got a space with DMAC being on sabbatical next year. So look, definitely room for Coombs Fabling as an outside back for the Chiefs. Josh Tipene asks us, did RTS secure a super contract? Yes, he did. He will be at the Blues next year. Having had no Bunnings NPC rugby, it's going to be interesting to see how he goes and how long he takes really to appear in a Blues squad. I wouldn't expect him to go straight into the side. I expect him to, but I'd expect him to take a while. But then again, if you think I think they're looking at him as a centre, and with TJ Fayani heading over to Japan, that really does not leave much in the centre stocks for the Blues with Rico Iwani and Tanalea Talia. Well, Tanalea Talia, as far as I can see, hasn't signed for next year yet. Or hasn't been announced as signing for next year yet. So at the moment, you've just got Rico and Roger Tuiovcek as the two centres. So it'll be interesting to see what they do there.
I love this time of the year, Paul, and I think for some reason rugby doesn't really promote it as well as they could. Just put that speculation out there. We all love it. We love I get tips from pretty much all over the place. I'd like to think that I'm probably around about 80% of the time I'm reasonably right. 20%, some you get wrong, but I'll tell you what, it's fun. It just keeps the fire burning during the off season.
No, absolutely. Look, there's various players, and obviously I'm using Wikipedia here so look, it's not 100% accurate, obviously, but currently they've got Caleb Clark and Mark Talia, two standout players for the Blues as outside backs, but players like AJ Lamb, Ammonia Narwire, Jacob Ratamukavai Neepkins, and Zan Sullivan, all currently not announced as Blues players for next year. But boy, oh boy, there's at least three there that I out of those four that I definitely would not want to lose.
There will be some horse trading. That's why I think there'll probably be a little bit of horse trading going on, Paul. Blues are looking for midfielders. Chiefs are probably looking for a couple of outside backs. So I'm pretty sure there'll be as much horse trading going on as there can be, and that's fun. I mean, so you come from a country in England where football is king, and part of the fun is the off season.
Yeah, and look, and as you say, the Super Rugby franchises could be making a lot more of it by with their social media, but around this side of things. But yeah, currently not doing so. Anyway, folks, hopefully we've helped you start your wind down for the day after you're working from home or working from wherever, and you've got something suitably relaxing to do this evening. We'll be back tomorrow at 5 p.m. Also, being a Friday, we'll also bring you our rugby predictions for the weekend on that one, ahead of the NPC games, as well as those internationals that we've mentioned that are going on this weekend. I will be at Bay of Plenty versus no, that's not Bay of Plenty versus Northland. Bay of Plenty versus White. Oh, I've gone blank as to who they're playing this weekend.
Waikato.
It is Waikato. Okay, thank you. Bay of Plenty versus Waikato on Saturday. Also, I will be getting up, obviously, for the Wales versus New Zealand game, so we'll probably be doing a post-match reaction show to that one as well, if I'm able to stay awake. So look out for that this weekend. And unfortunately, there will not be a 5 p.m. lockdown beers on Saturday because I'll be at the game. But we should be happening every other day. So have a cracking weekend coming up, folks. And hope you stay safe, get vaccinated, and let's get ourselves back to as close to normality as possible. Thank you, Stephen, and check you all later.